Three, two, one. Never thought murder smelled like honeysuckle. And welcome everyone to the 70th episode of Thursdays with Moire, all about film noirs, noir films, noir, and femme fatales. I'm your host, Ian Taylor. Join me tonight as my wonderful co-host, Devon Kane, and we have two brand new guests tonight. Well, one of them has been on the channel before, the other one is brand new. I'm sure you guys could probably give a better introduction than I ever could, so please introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. I am Jamara Forbes. I am co-owner and operator of Orange Hat Film Productions, fellow film student, graduate, film nerd extraordinaire. Um, Happy to be on here with you guys.
Awesome.
Happy to have you.
And who is this strange gentleman named Daryl?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Daryl. I'm cinematographer over at Orange Chat. Do a lot of my productions with Jamara, hand in hand, trying to make some indie films in Ontario. And yeah, we
We're
love our films and love talking films. So always happy to come back. And specifically, I love noirs. So
is,
down.
is it just
always.
me or do I hear some beeping in the background?
I mean, my cat is currently meowing and decided to just start doing that
Well, the
right as we
cat's
went
fine.
live.
The cat will
But
be the special guest, but I'm just wondering.
I don't hear anything. Jamara, your headphones were kind of crazy. I hear what they're saying now. Do you want to try your other set just to be safe?
Yeah. Give me a second.
Yeah.
No worries. While that's
Uh,
happening, what is a film noir? Miserable Pile of Secrets. No, it kind of started in the 40s, arguably with the Maltese Falcon, but I'd argue it kind of really started and honed in on the tropes in 1944 with Double Indemnity. It was a result of post World War II anxiety and the loneliness a lot of people were feeling and the corruption that the government was kind of spreading around the time. There's lots of themes of valuing money above all else, acting doing horrible acts of crime out of selfish love or selfish desire. And this genre fornicated throughout the years, kind of died out in the 60s when people were starting to get sick of the genre, and made a huge comeback in the 70s with films like Chinatown. Huge comeback to the neo noir genre that we see now, not as much as we used to, but every now and again we get films like Under the Silver Lake or trying to think of another very recent example here. Too Old to Die
Brick.
Young. Yeah, Brick. That's another good one. Too Old to Die Young, Drive. Any of those could be considered a noir. So it's really her genre to pinpoint for that reason because there's so many different themes. There's so many films where it's like, well, it's kind of a noir, but it kind of isn't. But it's kind of a loose genre tied to basically these personal stories of crime and vengeance is the best way to put it, with
mhm.
a heavy emphasis on style along with the substance.
Well, it's very interesting how it got like its name because you wonder why are these American crime films from the 40s called noir when that's French for black, and it's because it was a French essayist who coined the term. So what happened in World War II is that these films were being made while the war was still happening, and there was like an embargo of American films going to Europe where they couldn't get them for a while. So after the war had ended, suddenly that embargo was lifted, and then these French essayists were able to see all these crime films that were being made in America for the years that the war was going on, and they started to notice that there was a drastic change of tone in these films than what they had seen before. Like there was much more relatively like lighthearted kind of toned films in like the 30s with Scarface kind of being these very one-dimensional look at criminals, where these films that were coming out now were a lot more pessimistic and fatalistic, and there's just a dramatic tone shift, and so they coined the term film noir to kind of put a name to it. And it was also kind of interesting. The way they observed is that a lot of the filmmakers that became most notable for creating film noir were filmmakers who came from Germany to America to escape the fascist regime that was rising there, and there was almost like a hybrid of two German styles of film. There was Italian neorealism, which was very, bare bones, shot in real locations, shot with non-actors kind of filmmaking that
Mhm.
really looked at more so the reality of things that was happening at the time. And then German expressionism, which is almost the complete opposite, where it's these very abstract, angular, kind of expressive uh, films. And noir kind of exists in this lurid middle ground between those two, where the uh, kind of downtrodden realism of the world that they're in and that's in turmoil, and the kind of inner turmoil that occurs because of that. Um, so I think that's what film noir is in a nutshell.
Oh, totally. And like typical staples, like it's littered with very I don't know iconography of the time, but it kind of did set this standard where they kind of were the ones pushing the femme fatale archetype and really kind of playing with
Mhm.
like levels and characters. Like there was this theme throughout of like descent and like the layers of the underworld and how
Oh
you
yeah.
could take somebody who oftentimes wasn't even in control of these events and they got pushed down this dark path. And it was it was a great comment on of the time, like everything, like you said, getting soured, that the dark World War aesthetic seeping in. And yeah, it really just
Mhm.
bled out on the screen. And yeah, very iconic ways. I do like, it's great to hear you say that, because really German expressionism and Italian neorealism is at two of my favorite genres that exist. So of course
Oh
I
yeah,
would end up
and they're
loving the
both
noirs.
proto. They're both like, and they both kind of predecess these films, but these are like the perfect hybrid of those two kind of genres. And it's interesting that we're focusing on like the femme fatale kind of archetype with these three films, where this is a character one could argue is almost entirely birthed out of male anxiety. Um,
Yes.
because the,
For
the
sure.
world view was changing after the war. Women were uh, getting jobs and getting educated when the men were gone fighting, and so their idea of what these roles are was shifting, and they kind of projected that anxiety onto them, like, oh, all the women are out to get us or some shit. But it is interesting to kind of see how that plays out on screen and
And how it's
to
changed
what
over
it's
the years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I guess the only other thing to touch on, sorry if you did just mention this earlier, but the Hayes Code was a big influence
Yeah.
on
Oh
how
yeah.
this all kind of got its feeling. Like there was, Hollywood implemented their own code on themselves. That was basically, I forget specifically what it was for, if it was to meet like the church or certain government
Well,
standards of some kind. I forget this.
It
Do you
was
know
government
yeah.
specific?
standards,
Yeah.
essentially.
it,
Like the
it,
government
it was
stepped. Yeah.
government standards, and also the church had a lot of influence. They were trying to censor and ban these films,
Yeah.
so they said, okay, we'll come up with our own rules to play by them, so we can make what we want to make still, without being censored or boycotted. It's because
And
we need to make
man,
money.
there were some censorships. No smoking, no references to sex, no references to violence, no drinking, no drug use, no. I think there was certain clothing limitations too. Like you can't show like any nipples, period, or something along those lines. And these films basically were a giant middle finger to the Hays Code. Like watching Double Indemnity, I could not believe a lot of the stuff they got away with. And I
It's
joked with my
every
Exactly.
gray
mom where
area,
the
right?
first time you see we're not talking about it fully yet, but the first time you see Barbara Stanwyck, we were just like, oh my god, that is like frisky, slutty shit at the time. Just seeing those legs, my god.
Oh my God, a whole ankle.
Oh god, those.
Oh, let alone the
Do
Wow.
you
ankle,
see
that
the
a symbol of
toes?
adultery and
Oh,
being open
but
to other men.
Like,
double indemnity, more like double entendre, eh?
oh, hey. Speaking
True.
of double
That's
indemnity, I guess we might as well delve into it at this point. Devon, would you
Yeah.
like to
oh
introduce?
yeah, the film that we're all talking about. By the way, all of us are film nerds. We all went to film school, and this was like anybody that took the film noir class. This was like likely the first one that we talked about, just because it kind of encapsulates all the tropes that film noir became known for. So this is all of us just kind of racking our brains for the film education we had and nerding out. So, Double Indemnity is a Paramount picture starring Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, and also Edward G. Robinson, directed by the Billy Wilder, um, who is 2 out of 3 titles on this roster tonight. He's that much of an influential figure in the film noir world. But essentially, the plot is a Los Angeles insurance representative lets an alluring housewife seduce him into a scheme of insurance fraud and moida that arouses in the suspicion of his colleague, an insurance investigator. So, yeah, this is a film that more or less kind of encapsulates all the noir tropes where this insurance investigator comes in and he meets this woman and they fall in love and they plot against to kill her husband essentially. And the way this plot kind of unfolds just is really by the book what a noir has become known for. And something I was alluding to with the double entendre, the way they were getting around Hayes Code limitations to evoke these themes and underlying sexual tension is they have some really sharp dialogue, which may not be like realistic, quote unquote, but it really says a lot without saying much.
Yeah, it's so
And
much fun to listen to too. It's a
it's
good
very
riff into
clever
it.
writing.
Yeah.
The
So
speeding
And
was
clever.
an early one
It's
that
great.
Yeah. How
Oh,
fast
yeah.
was I going, officer? Suppose I give you a ticket. Suppose you let me off of a warning. Suppose I cry on your husband. Suppose I cry on your shoulder. Suppose you cry on my husband's shoulder. That kills it. Just lots of
oh,
entertained dialogue, and it's so fast. Like watching this
Mhm.
movie again, I was like, wow, people say so much dialogue so fast that I was kind of nervous to recommend it because I'm like, they just go by dialogue so quick. Like, are we gonna? No offense, but are we gonna be able to pick up on all of it? I had to rewind a couple scenes because I was just like, oh, what the fuck what the fuck did
Yeah,
they
no,
say? Like, wow. Hard to take
every
in.
like 10 seconds in like a dialogue exchange, I was like pausing for like the caption and getting a screen grab because
Yeah.
that was a good line.
But that's a product of its time thing for sure. And Belly Wilder gets better with that in Sunset Boulevard, where the dialogue definitely has more time to sink in. But I think that was just a movement around that time in cinema that changed that. And another nervous thing I'm always worried about with recommending all of these old movies is, it, like sure we can appreciate it for the time, and sure we can appreciate it as a genre piece, but is it like entertaining outside of that? Are we gonna enjoy it outside of that regard? But I gotta say, like 65 years later, this film is incredibly well paced. It's very
yeah.
entertaining, and like it's almost 2 hours long. And I gotta say, it doesn't feel like it at all, and which is incredible because it's mostly just people, like a few people talking in rooms, without much else going on. But like you said, Devin, the dialogue is so entertaining, and the characters are a little bit
Yeah.
one note, but they're still like very interesting and entertaining, and you're still excited to see like where the story
Mhm.
goes next.
And
Yeah.
I love this set of films because all of them are under 2 hours. Um, and
Very refreshing.
I've just been appreciating that brisk runtime more so more and more with each one of these episodes we do because we watch 3 movies each week and it's a bit of a time investment to really get into these things.
Yeah.
And because when I watch a film to study it and to really look at and examine what the other themes are, it's not like I'm just watching it to enjoy it. um I'm making notes and trying to research stuff, so there's more of a time investment. So I appreciate when the film itself is a nice brisk, easy to watch, kind of well paced thing that becomes just like eating popcorn with my eyes, you know.
That's a good way of putting it. But what do you think, Daryl, Jamar? What are your guys' thoughts on this movie?
To say that um, as far as like the structure and the pacing, I think that this film, because it is one of the first noirs, it really solidified that first person narration
Yeah, for
kind
sure.
of, and that really holds the story together, and you're following his every word, and he's being kind of witty about it and mysterious about it at the same time, but it's kind of almost the same thing as in Sunset Boulevard, which I thought was kind of a neat thing to carry over.
It's interesting to see where the director gets their inspiration from in their previous work. It's something that always fascinates me about these movies. But it is a genuinely entertaining experience outside of that. But Daryl, what about you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. In terms of the timelessness, I think that maybe it's, I don't know, again, how we look back on things, and when we were growing up. Wow, this is going to sound like an old person, but really it was only 40 years ago or something like that when I was a kid and would have first seen this on the small little black and white TV we had. And Yeah, like I really liked it back then, but I remember all of these movies I kind of just lumped into one like fast talking crime movie. Like that's just like so much of TCM was that, and my dad loved TCM, so like I it was just something very ingrained on me, and now that it's been like another 15, 20 years removed from that time, I think and let's be real, like you kind of touched on at the beginning too, like they show you noirs at the very beginning because I think it does kind of help hook you in as a little film student that doesn't know much yet, but like as now, like with all this experience and having made some films myself, like god damn, these it feels masterful now. Like you see the way, like you said, they pace some of these scenes, and like they will do a 3 to 4 minute dialogue scene between two people, maybe never cutting from more than three different shots, but it feels so quick and so enthralling that the pacing just it keeps it up. And I will say one film out of our trilogy I do not think does that.
Oh,
But when it comes
interesting.
to Wilder, I think he did have this kind of expertly crafted. Like they spent so long. I know this film or this screenplay took like 5 years or something like
Yeah,
that for
you
them
could
to
tell they
get that
rehearsed a
movie.
lot too.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's just they're getting it out.
Yeah,
I could
it's
never imagine the
and
amount of
you know
rehearsal it
that's
would be.
it's just a huge testament to the actors, and we haven't even talked about Fred McMurray's
No,
character because around this time, like you do not show a weak male protagonist. You do not show like a morally ambiguous character, and here comes along this film where, like, yes, he does try to redeem himself, and he is the lesser of two evils, but at the very beginning, we see him wounded, like covering up a wound, like deliberately lying to somebody to get to a phone and straight up admitting to crime and murder. So in the first 5 minutes, it just sets the tone very differently from a lot of films that are coming out around the same time. But it's also, I love those kind of openings where it's like it doesn't answer every single little question and instead just raises enough questions. Not so much that's frustrating, but just enough that you're just engaged. Like you want to see what happens next. Like why did he get shot? Why did he murder the person for a woman and money? Who's this woman? Well, how did money get involved? Like you're just at wondering all of these questions from the get go. It's
and
just a
like
great way
Jamar
to get you
touched on
hooked.
with oh sorry.
No, I'm done. I'm good.
Oh no, and just like Jamar touched on with the narration off that, like I feel like it did these things so well that it makes sense why like everybody would want to make a cheaper version of this and like extend this movement and like carry out this genre throughout that decade. Like it movies like this, like if I was sitting there, when this came out, I would have been so I would have been seeing this like 3 times a day. Like it's so
Me too.
I don't know. Like for its time, it's kind of like Citizen Kane. I feel like a lot of people want to hold Citizen Kane to a modern standard, and maybe it doesn't quite hold up that way
Mm-hmm.
because it was very focused on innovation over maybe like we were saying pacing and
Uh,
whatnot. But something like this, like again, maybe it's just been so long that like maybe it's a bit more nostalgic for me. But both the Wilder films for me like really hit me hard. Like this is some well
mm.
crafted stuff, and like you were saying, the acting is so like the worst part of all the acting is her wig. Everything else is
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's
Um,
not
Mhm.
bad in a lot of scenes. I think the lighting helps, but anytime like the lighting dims down and she's kind of staying in darkness, it's like you can see like her hair is significantly more exposed than the rest of her body, even without the lighting. It's like, all right, it's a little obvious, but for the most part, I think they
Oh yeah.
do a
oh
decent
yeah,
job hiding
You,
it.
you got that like hair light kind of kind of like haloing her in a sense, like all the light just kind of catches in her hair and makes her look like this innocent angel,
Yeah, it
which may or
fits.
may not have been intentional. It would have been intentional probably, but it's interesting with the whole narration. Like looking back at this, like you'd see this as kind of cliche, the way that he very conveniently confesses to everything in this recording, and that narration serves as like exposition for the plot unfolding. But you look back at how they did this one, and it just works so well. And yeah, everybody that has done this since is kind of derivative. But and I'm sure this isn't the first film that has done like a confession as exposition kind of narration. That's a lot of issues, but
yeah. I doubt
I
it invented on Midas Radis. Like,
yeah,
Yeah,
but it does it so well, and you can understand why everyone has basically copied this.
yeah, Chase the
Uh,
Dragon.
yeah, that was my
yeah,
point. That's a perfectly way of putting it. That was kind of what I was trying to touch on right there. Yeah.
And the
exactly.
lighting.
But it just works. It works so well.
Yeah. And the lighting
Can I
of
just
this. Yeah,
add
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go on.
go.
Yes.
that I am so in love with Billy Wilder's camera moves. Like,
Yes.
oh my gosh.
They're not too common, but it reminds me of Spielberg where there's a lot of camera movement, but you never really notice it. Like he always does it so
Yes.
subtly, and it organically
Fluidly.
flows with the more so organically flows with like the dialogue and the scene. Like when Norma and Fred get up after talking for the first time from the couches, you don't even notice there's a camera movement. Like I didn't even notice it till like the third time I watched it, because it so organically flows with the dialogue and with the movie. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's partially because of technical limitations, because you could not move those cameras around too much. They were incredibly heavy, so
Yeah, it's like
you kind
if
of
you
had
were
to
gonna
pick
move the
movements carefully.
camera
Yeah.
along, you had to set up all this hardware. The cameras were like 50 pounds with the magazines and the rails and the
Right.
dolly. But it's such a but because of all that like all that like hardware that's needed, it's like okay, if we're gonna move the camera, we have to have a very clear reason for it. And I think that discipline in the filmmaking adds to the storytelling because like we're only gonna move the camera, lumber this thing around if there's a very clear kind of narrative purpose for it. Or these days we have some incredible camera gear and hardware, like you may have seen that or like Ronin 4D. It's like this chicken looking kind of gimbal and camera built together. And that looks like a dream camera to carry around like everywhere in film where I can have a steady cam, a dolly, and a handheld rig all in one system. But the first thing that people are going to do is just move the camera around because they can. And like these days, we have a lot of people just doing camera moves because they can, not because it
Mhm.
means anything. Where back
Mhm.
then, and maybe I'm looking back at back then with rose tinted glasses, but because of the hardware limitations, they were a lot more focused in the purpose of why they were doing it. Otherwise, they would just keep it on sticks, right? So
Mhm.
it's nice to appreciate narratively driven camera movement where like you don't even notice it at first. It just works so well and makes sense when you see it.
Absolutely. And part of that also probably inspired the exaggerated lighting, because you couldn't move the camera very often. It's like we need to get the lighting just right. We need to get the mise en scene just right. And we need to rely on that more to convey an image. And that's where like the great iconic lighting kind of started in this movie, like the very harsh shadows and the sometimes the eyes will be highlighted but nothing else, and you'll see the lights for the blinds. It really That's another thing that kind of establishes like a dark atmosphere. Like a lot of films in like the 30s and 20s where like there's some great cinematography for sure, but a lot of it was like kind of flat. Get the studio
Hmm.
lighting just right. We need to see everything that's going on, and
Well,
this film offered a different take on that visually,
Well,
Mhm.
film stock was very limited back then. You needed to pump the
Yeah.
sets filled with light to get any kind of exposure. But I also just love how film naturally falls off into the shadows.
for
And I
sure.
love how they weren't afraid to kind of underexpose images. That really very literally lends into the noir theme is that they really let the shadows come into play, and it's a beautiful thing. It was really a thing in the 50s on like sitcoms TV where they just started evenly flat lighting everything. That way the actors and the cameras can kind of move anywhere. In one sense, it's freeing, but on the other hand,
There's no
there's not as much
motion.
visual depth or mystique to it.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like utilitarian, where these were definitely more uh, stylized and
Well,
pointed in a way where it brings you into this world.
well, and like you're saying with the film stock limitations to get those crisp shadows, like it's kind of like laziness. I don't want to call it laziness, but like you're saying, it leans that way because you only needed half the light to get this like open, like very fine thing. You could leave it fairly, you wouldn't have to stop down that much, but to get these crazy like you're saying mise en scene filled uh, beautiful shadows and stuff, you have to stop down so much to get that. And if you're
Mhm.
going to stop down, you have to double the lighting. And yeah, I can only imagine like the pain it must have been to get it just
Yeah.
right.
The amount of
But like you're
sweat.
These
saying,
giant like burning arc lamps or
yeah,
whatever. I'm not even sure what the really old school lamps were. Like I'm familiar with like Fresnel tungsten lamps, but those were like new back then.
yeah, no, the arcs were
And
the sensible ones back then.
oh fuck
Yeah,
yeah,
not only
but
that, but if
like
you touch it, you burn. Like the metal
Yeah,
was not exactly
Yeah.
desirable, and I think studio workers would have to wear like heavy duty gloves just to carry them
Oh, yeah.
around after a while.
Gloves, there's this joke that was passed around where it has this guy right next to the lamp, and then it cuts to an image of like Two-Face. That's how hot like those lamps were if you were that close to them. But
That's accurate.
yeah, no, like it's no joke, just the amount of like energy and power that it's just cool to appreciate kind of the hardware that went into these. But also, this is how you can tell it's an old movie. Like if you knew nothing about film and you looked at like the cinematography here, you would just notice all these unnatural, harsh shadows, which is part of like the film noir style. But you can tell, oh, that's a studio lamp. That's not what like a soft, dim, hard like a fixture in that office would look like. It's like this harsh spotlight kind of on him as he's sitting at this desk. But it does create kind of an interesting style though.
And
Totally.
at this point, I think we should talk about the characters involved. Like we already talked about Fred McMurray's character briefly. Walter. Walter. Keys. He's probably my favorite character in this movie. Like
Same.
I love the actor, and he has like this hard ass behavior, but like you could tell like he still cares about Walter. And I love the scene where he's like, it's like, why do you want to go around pounding doors all day? It's like, oh, it's an easy. It's like, oh, sitting at your desk is an easy living. It's like, oh, you think you're just patting me on the back, and I can't remember the exact dialogue. It has been a bit since I watched it again, but just that whole dynamic where it's like, I'm seeming hard ass, but I want like a good future for you, and there's no future in being the salesman, which kind of ties into the anti-capitalist themes too, where it's like, the only way out is just to help your friends, not to just support this corrupt system over and over again. And he keeps trying to help him, but Walter kind of keeps digging himself deeper. And the whole dynamic of lighting the cigarettes, and apparently Fred McMurray actually, it had to be practical, but he did know that technique and he improvised it. And Billy Wilder liked it enough that he just kept doing it. And it's not as easy as it looks. Like I actually
No.
tried it one time, and it is not easy to pull off. And with Keys flicking the cigarette at the end of the movie was a great way of showing like just it kind of adding to the tragedy of the scene and showing just how much he appreciated helping them do something as simple as lighting a cigarette for him throughout the whole movie. That was like a great visual way of showing that. My only problem with their relationship was the bit of narration where it's like, I knew you were hard on me, Keys, but deep down I know you were soft on me. And I thought, you didn't need to tell us that. Like, there was enough about their actual relationship that conveyed that information. I felt a little too handholdy, and I get it for the time. Like, maybe they thought the audience, needed that spelled out for them, but it did kind of take away from the relationship a little bit. But, still one of the best bromances in Hollywood. No gay vibes whatsoever.
I mean, very, very gay vibes.
Oh,
but,
slightly. Yeah. It's like, you ever married? Nah.
I mean, like even down to like, I really like the guy that played Nino Zacchetti. He didn't get much time, but he was doing his shtick really well. Like I don't know, maybe it was just the discipline of direction on set or whatnot, but it really did feel like across the board. I loved everyone that was on screen.
Yeah,
It
even
seemed. I'm trying to think.
Mr. Diedrichson, who barely gets any screen time, like he he kind of chews the scenery, and given this like temperamental behavior towards his wife and how paranoid he is, like Walter's being very patient with him. It's like, look, if you just sign here, if you just sign for this policy, we can just get it over with. You can cash in the check later time. He's constantly like, it's like, yeah, but when am I ever gonna need accident insurance? This just sounds like a fraud. This just sounds like this, sounds like that, and the fact that Mrs. Diedrichson and their daughter-in-law, I suppose, are playing at a different table. Like that's a good way of kind of visually conveying just how straining their relationship is together. And you hear about it all the time, but it's nice to have a scene that actually kind of shows it. And it's also the first time where he's basically thinking, all right, like I need to do this. Like this is this is it. This is the final moment that kind of convinces me that this needs to happen. It's a good way of kind of visually conveying that information. It's now one of my favorite scenes.
Well, I think one character we haven't mentioned yet that I think we're missed, considering the whole theme of this episode is Femme Fatales, is Barbara Sandwich's character, Phyllis.
Oh yeah.
And and something that I was prefacing this whole thing is that Femme Fatale, you could argue, is a projection of like male anxieties and the shifting um, roles in the workplace or whatever. But what's interesting, I was just reading this. Apparently, her character was based off of a real person, Ruth Snyder, who was the subject of this murder trial where she did actually
Really?
kill her husband. So it is based somewhat on it is based on reality, and that's what James M. Cain kind of wrote into the script.
Yeah, he did
So
that a lot too, apparently. He based a lot of his stories on like real people and really strange events and news stories that came out around the time, so
mm,
and that's what grounds these films so much, I think. And I'm kind of interested to hear your opinion on this. Like, what do you think about her depiction of the character? Because I'm kind of on two sides about it. On one hand, I get it, like she is a little bit mustache twirly and probably a little bit exaggerated. Like when the husband is murdered, we cut to her face just kind of smiling as this evil music plays. There's like, yeah, alright, I see what you're doing. But at the same time, you could make the argument that Mr. Dietrichson, sorry, Walter, is just as corrupt. Like, he did something terrible. He did something terrible out of selfishness and, love and out of loneliness and desperation. Like, he didn't need any more
mm,
money. He had a cushy job. He didn't necessarily need a girl. He had like a pretty good lifestyle, but this kind of corrupt behavior, and that's what the film is about. And a lot of these films are about is, you know, the need for more, the need for greed, the need for like this capitalistic desire to get more in your life, just because when you're not happy, just get more of something. That kind of just drives people apart and drives them to do terrible things. And I'd argue she even says like we're both rotten, and there's a common theme of like there's no point in hiding from this, Walter. Like you're not gonna get away with this, just like her, no matter how innocent you try to be. So, but Daryl and Jamar, I'm kind of interested to hear your perspective on Mrs. Dietrichson and her nice wig.
The
I mean,
wig.
the plan was mostly his, right? Like, I like a lot of what you're saying because I think him being the narrator, he's in the fact that this is a quote unquote confession. Like, it is a bit untrustworthy in that he's
Oh,
trying to
for
skew
sure.
all the
mm-hmm.
events to skew him in the best light, even, and she is this thing that took me down, and the whole Zachetti thing, and like, I do feel like there's a different. The difference to me is she couldn't pull the second shot, so in that way, wasn't she like that hair more moral than him? Because he just goes bam bam, like two shots immediately as a perfect statement back. But if we're talking like acting wise, I think she does an absolutely phenomenal job. Those intro scenes are carried on charisma and chemistry. And I think it's pretty easy to just say, oh yeah, that's a typical, or like the root of the cliches and whatnot. But like, that was two people on set, and they fucking killed it that day.
Yeah,
Like, it was
and
like, it's crazy to see. But yeah, I don't know how Jamar feels about it personally.
good question.
I I love her, but and that I don't know. I really like the performance, and I think that she did a phenomenal job.
Yeah,
As a femme fatale, I think that she sets the bar really high. Um, but I, in comparison to the other films we watched, I think I like those femme fatales a bit better, which is strange.
Well, not necessarily. They've had more time to develop. Like this was kind
That's
of like setting
true.
up the archetype in a
mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, girl boss, he had it coming.
That would be
But
Lara
no, it's
But
Croft,
interesting.
yeah.
no, I just
No,
I
go ahead.
I like how she like this is one of the first examples of like a female using her sexuality as a weapon almost to
Mm-hmm.
kind of like lure him in the beginning with just with her intro scene and um kind of just taking control of her reality and formulating this plan with him and following through with it.
Straight down the line. I
Yeah,
think that's the line, right? Yeah.
it's a very interesting, depiction of that. And I'm gonna quote Jurassic Park here, where you can see it in their eyes. She's figuring things out. And there's so many scenes where it's like you can see in her eyes this plan just kind of clicking together when he's talking about his she talks about this accident insurance, and her eyes just light up with the more information she gets, and the more she finds out about how much money she could just get out of the situation. Just little details like that I just love, where like the eyes tell one story and like the rest of the body language tells another. Like I always love performances
Yeah.
like that. It makes
Mhm.
rewatches more fun too.
I liked when her husband is getting killed by the guy. The shot is just on her and her kind of reaction to it,
Great
which
way
I
to
thought
cut
was really
around it.
interesting.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's a good way to cut around it, but also shows like her having some kind of release from that. I don't know. There's different ways to kind of interpret that, but I thought that was really interesting the way they edited that scene, or didn't show the murder happening, but this kind of catharsis that she's like feeling perhaps as it's happening. But it is interesting though, like even though she does this absolutely great job with performance, apparently she was a bit hesitant with it. Like she was the first choice to play the character, but she was really unnerved when seeing that the role was of a ruthless killer. And she brought this up to Billy Wilder, and his response was very of the time, I'd say. Are you a mouse or an actress? You know.
Jesus.
Yeah, see, but yeah, it was a good decision in the end, because she played this iconic, great character that would kind of morph into a very interesting character trope later on in cinema. And and once again, you could argue that other characters are just as shady as she is. Like even Nino was like kind of falling for it at one point too, and Nino, sorry, make a Kitchen Nightmares reference, and
Mhm.
even with what Nino was going on, where um, his girlfriend mentions that he didn't make enough money, so the father, my mother and father didn't want him around. Even that idea, where it's like you're just not bringing home enough money. All these characters are consumed by money and greed, one way or another. Walter with working for the insurance company, and Keyes is kind of like the one character that's exempt from that to an extent. Like he's trying to be humble, he's trying to offer better jobs, especially for his friend, and because of that, he's the one character that isn't, affected by this crime whatsoever. And he's the one who could kind of take the moral high ground. So I thought that was an interesting take. And his last line too, where you're just expecting this big rant and this big speech, and Walter says, "All right, time for the big speech, Keys." And all he can muster is, "Walter, you're all washed up. Like you don't deserve a big speech. You don't deserve like any kind of effort into talking you down. It's just this simple takedown, and that's all you get. That's all you're worth to me at this point." Uh,
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of his performance, in all honesty, and kind of leaning into the
oh, I'd
next film
agree
we're going to talk about. I think he does most of that acting with his face. Like
for sure.
he didn't need to talk in those moments because
Mhm.
of how powerful he was. Because yeah, that's what the audience wants. You are looking to him the same way Walter
Was
is, begging for this reaction because he's been the hothead the whole movie, and reversing that at the end is, oh, just a
You know what?
beautiful
Just
stroke
looking
of
at the
genius.
whole cast of characters in this, like you can tell that these like actors were just of a completely different generation. Like just the way they express themselves, the mannerisms is just very unlike something you see today. And it's
Mhm.
just interesting to go back and kind of see this very theatrical, like you can tell that they've been acting to camera for a long time, but there's still this very like expressionistic kind of body language with accentuating every single bit of dialogue and point that they make. Like I like their boss that they have where he starts to suspect that there's foul play. Um,
Where's that gun of yours,
and
Keys?
I yeah, it's like and the way he was just delivering his lines was just kind of it's kind of hilarious kind of looking back at this because it seems a little over the top, but it's just very of its time kind of acting. And it's funny that when I see some interview bits of Norm Macdonald's, I see him kind of emulating that style uh in his jokes, and
God
it's
damn
very kind of out of pocket. um yeah, that was me. That whole point was just me to shoehorn Norm Macdonald into the discussion because
Yeah,
he
I
had
was
to
gonna
come up.
say one every time.
Every time. Did you guys have any issues with it? Because mine are very minor.
The wig. Uh,
Easy one. Go on.
I really don't know, man. Like I found myself enthralled by all of this. Again, saying the pay, like I'm I'm so floored that it was as long as it was, because it does feel like a solid hour and a half
I know,
movie.
right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
insane.
crazy. Yeah, I don't know. Let me think on that for a sec. Maybe I do
What
have something.
one nitpick that I have, it doesn't have to do with the movie, but more just like a lost skill set. How do you light a match with your thumb and that's it? Like, I want to know how to do that.
Oh,
Do you need like a
he
really
actually
strong
did that
callus on
though.
your finger?
Is the thing.
Yeah, like he actually did that. Like, how do I not? Why do I not know how to
I
do that? I
don't
want
know.
to know
I
how to
think
do
Like,
that.
it's
do like flipping a coin, and you got to strike the edge, like you
at
kind of got
just
to
the
go
right angle. I
diagonally
think.
up it with
Yeah.
your nail, so it's like
Yeah,
causing a
It's
strike.
yeah. I don't know,
yeah.
man.
I thought you just need like a lot of callus on your thumb or something. Like,
Ugh,
are they all just like
That
tough
could
as
work too.
nails back in the day? I don't know.
They're all hard boiled.
Yeah.
literally. Yeah, they get cigarettes in their sandwiches. What about you, Jamar?
I don't really I don't really have any nitpicks. Like when I watch this movie, it's just like one of those classics. I'm just along for the ride.
Fair enough.
Exactly.
I mentioned earlier that like the narration is a little too like on the nose. Like there's a scene where he's like, "I went to the bowling alley and played a few lanes. Went to the parking lot to have a smoke." It's like, okay, like I get it. Like I see what's happening. I didn't need this part of the story narrated, but it's such a minor nitpick because, like you said, there's a good narrative excuse for the narration. It was kind of setting up a very common trope, and it is well written and
Hmm.
well delivered overall. My biggest complaint is that it's like there are some logic issues every now and again. Like, apparently the guns at the end of the movie are quiet guns. These unsilenced revolvers are very quiet because no neighbors hear that. Even Nino, who was inches away from the house by the time Walter leaves, is like, come on, he didn't hear the gunshot, really? There was like several gunshots, nothing else was happening. It's a quiet neighborhood. I don't know, man. Like that was that was a little too convenient. That was a little too like, oh, we gotta keep the plot moving. We can't deal with police until like the epic climax. But that's it. Like I said, like very nitpicky, and it's yeah, incredibly
I have another extremely minor nitpick. That grocery store doesn't look real to me. That looks like a set.
really.
And also, well, no, and the other thing is like the shelves are like up to like the top of his neck, and that's just so you can see their faces and whatnot. But then there's like the one woman complaining that everything's on the higher shelf, and like she
That's
could
not a high shelf.
she could have reached it if she wanted to. He
I
was just kind of standing in the way, and she was just trying to be
yeah,
polite.
that
And
part's true. Like they
and
probably took out a couple shelves and a couple of
oh
cans,
no,
but
it's a set. The whole thing
it
is a
is.
set.
But
That's
it
not a
looks
real
Yeah, yeah.
grocery
convincing.
store.
Most of them are sets.
It
Yeah.
honestly looks
Oh yeah.
convincing. I don't know. I thought it looked pretty good, but yeah, just shows how good the production design was, I guess. Final ratings for Double Indemnity. We'll let the guests start.
I'll give it an 8.
Great, mate.
Oh.
Daryl.
Yeah.
I mean, I lean more towards a 9 personally.
Nice. I agree. 9 out of 10. It is excellent, incredibly well paced, holds up after all this time, and just, again, I cannot believe a film like this was made in the early 40s, but I'm so happy it was.
I'm gonna give it an 8 just to create headroom for the next film. I think it's a solid film otherwise.
Fantastic. Sunset Boulevard. I think we agreed that Daryl and Jamar, you both should introduce this one since you have more experience, a little more experience with the film industry than we do. However, you guys want to introduce it is up to you. But either way, spoilers for Sunset Boulevard.
I mean, usually spoilers for all the movies.
Well, I mean, yeah, spoilers for all the movies, but Sunset Boulevard especially. A lot of very interesting things happen in the story.
Yeah, totally. So about 5 years later, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty
Six.
sure. Yeah,
6 years.
6.
after 6 years after Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder returned to the genre and made what I think is one of the greatest films of all time, like straight up. And I would not have had that opinion before rewatching it. I do not remember this really connecting with me in film school when I first came across this wild story. But nowadays, yeah, I like you said, it hits home a little bit more, but it's a really short and quaint description for the actual synopsis. It's a screenwriter develops a dangerous relationship with a faded film star determined to make a triumphant return. But I think it's so much more than that. I do think that only 6 years later, Wilder was already ready to get reflexive on maybe it wouldn't even be a genre, but returning to the same kind of themes that we now know as noir. And yeah, he came back with a real swing. I don't know what to say, grand slam of a movie. Uh Basically, this I'm trying. Where's the names? Joe Gillis, that's his name, played by
Joe.
William Holden, is a fading screenwriter that can't get much work. There's a great line where it's like, "Oh, I heard you had a lot of talent," and he says, "Oh, well, that was
That
last
was
year.
last
This
year.
year, I'm just trying to make rent or something like that."
Yeah,
And
that was great.
so he can't sell any scripts, and he's having a rough go of it. And the first little chunk of the movie kind of leads you down the path of he's got some loan sharks after him, and he's not in a good place financially by any means. He even tries to beg for a loan from his agent, I believe it is, the writing agent he has, and to which his writing agent replies that some of the best things ever written were written on an empty stomach, which definitely reinforces some of the themes of this movie for sure. And
Hmm.
after, in a Pulp Fiction-esque way, coming across the people looking for him at a stoplight, he gets in a little bit of a car chase and ends up blowing a tire. At which point, the closest driveway he finds, he turns into, which is where we meet. Yeah, you could call her the femme fatale of this film, Norma Desmond. But
Norma Desmond.
I feel like we could have our whole discussion on just that fact alone.
For sure.
But yeah, then the rest is more so what you get with the synopsis, where they end up forming a somewhat symbiotic relationship, as it would seem to him. But lots of creepy stuff happens, especially with the bodyguard or servant of some kind that's
The
around the
Oh,
house.
butler,
her
Max.
first
Yes.
husband.
Butler, that's what they call him. And yeah, I personally I love this film. We can get into all the details later on. I think that's all the big setup of it for me. But yeah, this really is such a friggin' fantastic film.
It
I feel I need new adjectives today. But yeah, Jamar, anything you have to add? Sorry.
it really is just like a dissection on fame and what that can do to a person and
Yes.
how people are changed by being on the screen or being part of a film. And I think it's so cool to have that insight and to see it all play out from so many different angles, because you learn in the like later on that the butler is also a director, a former director, and everyone, it feels like, was part of the film world. So it is just kind of this like degradation of all these filmmakers and watching the fallout of what Hollywood does to you. Ooh.
Oh
Exactly.
yeah. No, it's like the fame of being a successful star, and then dealing with like the rejection of her not being like wanted by sound films, or
Yes.
like everyone else moving on, and she hasn't, and she's kind of lived in her own like isolated world where she has this kind of inflated ego as like a coping mechanism, basically, where and it all is is said in one line saying, I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Iconic line delivery for sure. And Hollywood kind of
Yes.
encourages that kind of behavior. Like you get like these actresses and actors that are held up to such high pedestals, and they're constantly surrounded by interviewers that don't like insult them, and fans that just give them unabashed love, and they're thrown into like these big roles and these big pictures, usually with like these like morally righteous characters that, and like of course they're gonna get consumed by all of that and just start thinking like everything they're doing is right, everything they're doing is the best way, like the world can't live without me. And for soon, one of the most telling lines in the movie is without me there wouldn't be a Paramount. And that's very much how a lot of actors feel. It's like, nobody would have jobs without me, nobody would be around
Hmm.
without me. But they don't really understand that the world just moves around them. Like it evolves over time, and they aren't gonna be a part of it, but they can't accept that. And sure, it's a little bit exaggerated in this movie for sure, but there are people like Norma Desmond to an extent in the world. Look at something like, Amy's Baking Company, where essentially these two psychopaths ran a restaurant, but the issue was the husband told her that everything she was doing was right, and the customers are just in the wrong. You can't take any criticism, and it got to her head. It just led her to firing so many people and living in this world where she's right and everyone else is wrong. It's, the same thing here. People like this do exist to an extent. It's a very scary thought, and the fact that film from 1950 again just blows my mind that it conveys that so well.
Let alone
It's
meta
great.
in 1950.
Yeah,
Like
It's
this is
very
terror
a
meta.
mounts in
meta
the movie.
fucking film.
Yeah.
And it's
Wow.
crazy that they greenlit this too when it
Yeah.
kind of puts them, it criticizes them just as much as,
100%.
anything.
Yeah.
Well, there's
Which,
two kind of funny facts about that. One, because you just mentioned the Paramount line where she said it wouldn't exist without me. I think part of me thinks that was added after she was finally cast as the role, because she was key in the early day, like Gloria Swanson, the actress, was key in the early days of Paramount.
Oh, for sure.
And like a lot of
Mhm.
the trivia stuff I found about this is like it really wouldn't have been around without her. So he was like constantly pushing that meta line right to the edge.
honestly, that's great because then it feels really like earned in that metatextual sense, like she literally was part of that. So that's really cool,
Yeah,
actually.
not
I had
only
no
that,
idea.
but the films in the movie that she was in that she'd watched with Joe, those were actual films that she was in. Those were like actual real
Mhm.
movies. It wasn't just
Oh,
something they
that's cool.
shot for the movie. And to extend on that, all of the actors in the infamous poker scene are actually silent actors, including the one, the only Buster Keaton, who says pass, I'll pass. Who was a big like silent action star and would constantly nearly kill himself with all these dangerous stunts in movies like The General and what's the one where he's climbing the clock tower? I'm not quite sure, but all these silent actors.
Safety
Sherlock Jr.
last.
Safety
Oh yeah,
last,
Safety
yeah.
Last.
Oh no,
And
I think you're thinking of Harold Lloyd, but people often confuse those two.
I
Oh.
But
apologize, but he was
no,
around.
like
Yeah,
yeah, Buster Keaton is a legendary stunt guy, and it's funny it's awesome to see them all in this movie kind of playing themselves essentially, or a version of themselves in a sound world. This brings me back to when we were talking about Charlie Chaplin doing his first sound picture, and it being kind of a stab at the Hollywood system for making him kind of integrate sound into his, films, and how much of a Chad move that was. I'm not going to apologize for that joke.
yeah, and
But
all of these actors' careers were basically ruined by that. Like Charlie Chaplin was a rare exception where he's like, all right, they want me to talk, I'll talk. I'll make a movie like The Great Dictator where I have all of these long, important monologues. But actors like Buster Keaton and Gloria Swanson, to an extent, were considered like too over the top and too eccentric, and their voices didn't really work, and any of those issues would come up, and their careers were basically ruined by the introduction of sound. So, and Norma Desmond constantly blames sound, where it's like, we didn't need dialogue, we had faces. Did they forget what a star looks like? Like they think like dialogue ruined the industry, but really it was just like they don't realize it was an inevitable change in the system. Like so many movies were assisted by dialogue, but of course, they just needed something to put their blame on. And it's interesting to hear like the debate between both forms because it doesn't really take the side of dialogue films either. There's he's trying to pitch this very generic script at the start of the movie, and every time he pitches the script it's just the most generic, like, oh, it's like this movie meets this movie, it's like this movie meets that movie. It's just he's pitching it for the sake of pitching it. There's not really passion behind the story. And I love the dynamic he has with the other writer as well. And one of my favorite exchanges is, "I think the story should just say a little something. That's all. Oh, I see. You're all about the message and not about the story." And I think that's kind of Billy Wilder's way of saying those two forms need to come together. Like neither approach really works on their own
Totally.
to really make a compelling story. Like all three elements need to come together, and neither of these characters really realize that until it's too late. So it's meta
yeah,
on that
I,
level as well.
I love seeing these kind of discussions happen where filmmakers are quietly venting their frustrations with dealing with, different people in the industry. be it writers or other filmmakers or producers, and just kind of quietly venting about it in this sense, um, in a very kind of subtle, nuanced way, unlike Lars von Trier and Nymphomaniac. Um,
Cough.
So salty.
oh yeah, I still taste the salt on the back of my tongue after that movie. Um,
God.
yeah,
Yeah.
but no, I actually really gonna just collect my thoughts here. I like when he first meets up with Normand and she has all these like sprawled notes and she says she's been writing this for years and it's gonna be her magnum opus. And he's just like sitting there reading kind of through all of it, these like loosely drawn kind of manuscripts, and he says there's something, refreshing about reading bad writing. Um, and I just found that really funny because I've read much of bad writing in my time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what makes their dynamic work, though. Like, she is so over the top, and the butler's so over the top, but he's the only one who's really like taking it seriously, and he's the only one that's kind of saying what the audience is thinking. Like one of there was like genuine attempts at humor in this. I think that's what makes it work too. Is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. That it can't like it knows how absurd it is. It doesn't pretend to take itself like
Oh,
it
I was laughing
jokes
a
on it
lot.
as well. Oh yeah,
Like
Oh
a
that
yeah.
one of the
lot more
funniest
than I
bits in the
thought I
movie is
would.
when they were in the car and she's like, criticize these clothes. These clothes are perfectly fine, but she's like, no, we need to get you a nice suit. And it's like, I don't need a nice suit. I like what I'm wearing. And it's like, and it goes over this long monologue, and there's a few seconds, a beat. You think it's over, and he throws on his cigarette. It's like, do you have to smoke? And he's just like, oh, fuck, God damn it. And like the
Too
comedic timing
dumb.
behind that was very entertaining. Just that moment where it's like, okay, good, they finally stopped arguing. It's like, oh, God damn it, here we go again. And their dynamic was very entertaining and very, very creepy too. Like I forgot how creepy this movie was at times. The first time you see like all this stuff from his apartment, and midway through his narration, Randy's like, "Wait, what the hell was it? All my stuff doing in my apartment? Like, how did they get in my apartment and get all this information?" And they never really
Yeah.
explain it, which it kind of bugged me a little bit. But then I think it kind of fits the themes where it's like if you have a lot of money and power, you can basically, get away with anything you want and get all the information you want. So it kind of works in that sense. But it was very kind of nitpicky. It was like, how'd you get his information? He didn't mention where he lived or anything. Just look, probably done for pacing because again, this is also a very briskly paced film. Another, I think it's even longer than Double Indemnity, and it somehow feels even shorter.
Yeah, this strikes a perfect balance. Like I can't say enough about how much I almost didn't want this film to end. I loved every new setup they were going to, and the way that the story actually evolved. Because as we said before, like these films begin at the end, both of them, and you know right
Hmm.
from the beginning where it's going. But for some reason, it just makes the journey that much more fun. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it did strike me so differently this time, but like so many of those conversations about like writing together, like you mentioned, like just the fact that they have this untitled love story and how it mirrors everything.
Yeah.
I do
It,
can't say enough.
and the opening kind of makes it more foreboding, I find, because in the opening of Double Indemnity, the little teaser, there's like a slight hope that he could get away with it. There's a slight hope that we don't really know what's going to happen after he makes the call, so he could potentially get away or redeem himself. But in Sunset Boulevard, it's like, no, he's dead. Like, that's it. End of the
Yeah,
line. Like, you know exactly where
it's
it's going.
funny
It's
yeah,
heartbreaking.
it's funny this whole narration's coming from a dead man in a swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
But then
Yeah.
and there is this idea of like fatalism where he sums it up as there's a man who wanted a pool, he got the pool, and then he drowned in the pool. Um,
Very Kubrick in his description of the plot, just like the
yeah,
bare essentials.
not bleak whatsoever
Nope, not at
in
all,
its outlook. Yeah.
for sure. Let's talk about Gloria Swanson and her character, because this is the reason I wanted to introduce this film, because this was less of a typical femme fatale, more of like a sympathetic take on the character. We mentioned like just how egotistical and obsessed she is, but you it's about halfway through where you realize like she's suicidal. Like they had to take out all of the
Hmm.
razors and all of the guns and all of the anything that she could potentially harm herself with around the house just so she wouldn't
Hmm.
kill herself. Like she's on that level. So you're secondhand
Yeah.
embarrassed for her, but you're also like feeling for her at the same time. You perfectly understand where she's coming from and how the system destroyed someone like her, and it is heartbreaking and creepy to watch in equal measures. It's very interesting step in the next direction for that kind of character.
I mean, she's a very tragic figure because she is the product of this system that built her
Mm-hmm.
up and made her a star, and then more or less discarded her. And then seeing just the kind of fallout of that play out is a tragic thing where she has to, kind of cope by gassing herself up or developing this kind of ego and, believing in herself when no one else does. And then everyone else just trying to keep up this illusion in this big empty house that she's in, that she's still someone to them when they've all but forgotten about her. It's just a very tragic kind of figure, but it shows how, you know, these people get into these situations from like a system that kind of drops them when they no longer need them.
Jamar, is this a better femme fatale for you?
I thought this one was a very interesting take because typically with femme fatales in general, they're after money, they're after the greed, they want to take down someone, some guy somewhere and succeed, and she already has it all. Norma has everything. She has the house,
Mm-hmm.
she has the money. Like at the New Year's party, she's there just telling Joe like, what do you want? I'll buy you anything you want. I
Yeah.
have oil fields over here. Like she has everything that she could possibly need. And it's interesting that like she still has this disassociation, and she has Max like feeding her delusions, and it is very sympathetic in comparison. Like instead of I you're rooting for her to become sane almost, but
And that's where I think it really
Yeah,
starts to
you also know where
twist
it's
the,
going.
the genre, right? Like it starts to get reflexive on itself because the twist in this one, like usually the twist is that oh the woman was behind it or whatnot if we're talking the cliched
Hmm.
look at it. But like with this, Max is the one who has the goals, right?
Yep.
Like he came back to Norma because he just wanted to be with her. He manipulates the situations around because he still thinks he can either end up with her or maybe for a while he believes in the delusion that maybe she can get another picture up and going because hell, he's a direct he can be right there and live it all out with her. But like like you said, he's the creepy one who's getting the bags from the places, and I don't know. In the end, like he has more. I don't know, not to gain, I guess, but like his maintaining this like thing he's reaching for. Like maybe he does have
Hmm.
this hope of ending up with her one day again. But whereas like Jamar's saying, it's not really Norma pushing it forward in that fatale way. Like I feel like her tragedy just makes her on this downfall with um I keep forgetting his name. Gillis? Gillis is it? Maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gillis.
Yeah, and I think that's where it does start to get a lot less cookie cutter, and that's why the ending I think started to hit me
Hmm.
so much. It dips a toe into the surreal too. Like I feel like I I just like the lack of blood in the ending, and it's like
Hmm.
he kind of gave up playing the Hays Code because I know with the writing of this one, like how you said, it getting greenlit, the way they did it was saying that they were adapting a story that was I think it was called Can of Beans, and they would give them like 5 pages at a time.
Interesting.
But the funny thing is, once Paramount found out that they were doing all this meta stuff, they were actually fine with it. So like, if they
Really?
weren't okay, we probably would have never seen the film.
That's interesting.
But
No.
yeah,
And
it definitely got its foot in the door before it really like asked for forgiveness instead of
It
permission,
may have been
kind
too
of
late at that
idea.
that point too. It may have been like, well, we're gonna lose a lot of money if we pull out, so I guess we
Yeah.
don't really have a choice but be okay with it.
well, no, I think that's good that good on them for being sports about it and making this happen. Um, what's interesting about Gloria Swanson's character to me, she almost reminds me of like that really rich, affluent aunt who's kind of estranged from the family and is just trying
Yeah.
desperately to connect with with you because you're the only one that's like showed her attention in all these years. Um,
That's a good way
I
to
don't know.
put it.
I got that kind of vibe from it, but no, I think it does show. It is very reflective on the femme fatale character because, like I was saying, often they seem to be these like maniacal mustache twirling, even though they don't have mustaches to twirl. They somehow manage to twirl
They
quite a bit
grow
of
a
it.
mustache
Um,
just to twirl it and
where
then lose the mustache.
this, where her downfall is a product of like something bigger than that and of Hollywood basically. So it's kind of pinning that back onto them. Like, do femme fatales exist, or is this something Hollywood has created for the big screen to project our anxieties onto? And I think that that's an interesting kind of thing that this film presents. Um, and I could tell that David Lynch saw this back in the day and got a lot of ideas.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's really cool to
this
kind of
movie
see.
walked so Mulholland Drive could run.
Exactly.
Yeah, lots of vibes from that. And the ending too is just so heartbreaking where it's like she doesn't even realize what's happening around her and she
Mhm.
has to be convinced that this is the scene in the palace and she's like, "Yes. Yes. Oh, I can't go on. I'm too happy. I'd just like to
Mm.
make shout out to show just how happy I am to be working again." All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up. I probably butchered that wholeheartedly, but it's very tragic, and it is exaggerated just enough to make you go like, all right, is
Hmm.
this really happening? Is it not? Why don't they just cuff her and arrest her? But I think it does fit like the dreamlike logic, and there is like a satirical slant to it that I can definitely like let
Mm.
it slide. And the fact
Well,
that her
they
friend has to watch her
It
do
is
this is
almost
even more horrifying.
it is almost a literal downward spiral with her descending the staircase
yeah, yeah.
ever so
Literally,
slowly.
yeah.
We do have a scene
But
explaining it though. That kind of I didn't remember it, but upon rewatching it, that little moment with the two cops where they kind of look at each other and say, "Well, she's heading downstairs."
Well, no,
Like
they're
are
like,
you gonna
it's one way to get her
handcuff her if you know
downstairs.
she's yes, exactly. But like, are you gonna do that? Like, I think that's where, and this is a time where you couldn't be on pills or people would think you were a crazy person in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like these people being that stunned, I feel like that might just be more accurate for that time.
Oh,
Like what
everybody
would
else
you
being
do?
stunned for sure. Like, I get it. It's like she's a
Yeah.
celebrity. When a celebrity gets arrested now, like paparazzi's constantly like trying to hog, get the footage as soon as they can, and getting into a crime scene before when they really shouldn't or when they're supposed to. Especially back then, they weren't really good at holding those kind of people back as much back in the 50s as well. So there is enough like reality behind it that the scene works, but I think it was the point that was supposed to be a bit exaggerated to kind of show the downward spiral that both characters kind of suffered at the end.
Oh yeah, that's what I meant. It dips that toe in the surreal. That's the
Yeah,
scene where
it
it really
fits
it
very
goes down.
well.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
the
I,
set
I
this go on.
yeah, I love how this film ends in the kind of surreal territory it ends up in, and that's always been the most memorable scene for me and why it's been so quoted, and it's a really beautiful moment. But there's some stuff coming back to this film that I noticed at the very beginning that I
Mm.
didn't notice on the first run, and it's part of his narration. He was saying, I'll tell you the true story before the press, distorts it. Which I think is really interesting because we talk about how distorted and polarizing the media is today, but that was even a problem back then. Um, so it was just a little bit of throwaway dialogue that he had that I thought was really interesting. Um, and then there was another fact I was reading. Apparently, this house wasn't actually on Sunset Boulevard, um, but it still exists on. I think the street was Quebec, or
Really?
was that the last film? I
Huh.
was reading some trivia.
No, I think
I,
that's this one. Was Quebec.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Actually, no. I think it's the last film that's on Quebec Street, which is interesting. But anyway,
Oh.
these places still exist because they're Hollywood history.
That just adds to like the vibes of the movie that you just can't get rid of these figures in history. Like they're always gonna last as soon as you put them in the spotlight. She's literally
Hmm.
put in the spotlight, and that's the only way like other people notice her is
Yeah,
because
and
like the spotlight's
yeah,
focused on her.
another interesting thing is that unlike Phyllis's character in the last film, that actress was kind of hesitant to be a part of it, and she was kind of talked into it in that kind of masculine way. Where this one, Gloria Swanson had already accepted that Hollywood didn't want her anymore, and she had like moved on with her life. Like she was doing some radio work in New York and some television stuff, so she was happy. But she did find the script really interesting. Like, huh, what if I did like played the opposite kind of thing? Like, what if I didn't accept that this is how things were? What would that be like? So I think that's really cool of her to
Nice.
kind of approach it that way, where she wasn't, actually going through this turmoil, but she could kind of imagine herself in that kind of opposite sense. I think that's really cool that she was able to approach it that way.
Nice. Yeah,
And then
for
you
sure.
still got all that past headshots and movies, and
Oh
you
yeah,
can still use all of that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's a
it's
match made
very
in heaven.
uncanny. And we didn't talk. Eric von Stronheim, who plays the butler, was actually directed her first movie, and I don't know if they had a relationship together. I don't remember if he's actually her first husband or not. But Gloria's been married 6 times. Like that is that is just insanity. I think it was like
Dang.
4 times before the movie came out. And
hmm
Cecil B. DeMille, director of Ten Commandments, shows up as himself and kills it. Like he crushes it. He's the second best director cameo in a movie since Martin Scorsese in Taxi Driver. Like he just sells like the sorrow and disappointment of his character so well. Like he's
Totally.
you know get me and get me going coal, and after the conversation he's just so pissed
Mhm.
off about like what they
It,
basically did to her is really heartbreaking to watch. And a very
it,
clever twist because you expect him to be like this one-dimensional asshole, like telling it to her straight, but no, he can't bring it to himself to like ruin her career once again and ruin her hopes and dreams again. So he kind of has to dance around the issue very uncomfortably, and it adds an interesting dynamic than what you'd expect from a scene like it.
yeah, it's just crazy how like meta Hollywood this is for its time, and this probably was the most self-referential Hollywood film, but until The Player came out in the 90s, where
Easily.
a bunch of actors basically just volunteered to have cameos in that film just to work with Robert Altman.
Yeah, Jeff Goldblum took $1 paycheck to be in what was it, Nashville? Like he just wanted to work with him so bad.
Wow.
So many actors loved working with him, but Billy Wilder too. Like a lot of actors loved working with him too. Not quite so much at first, but later on, like so many people would
Mm.
jump onto his project. And I think Marilyn Monroe was willing to take a pay cut, which hadn't happened before in any of her other movies. Did you guys have any issues with this one? I have. My only issues are if you take away like the dreamlike logic, some things don't really make any sense. Like they search for weapons and knives in their apartment, but they left a gun behind. They didn't notice a gun. Someone being
It's just a
suicidal, you might
gun. Who
want.
cares?
Yeah, you might want to hide. I don't buy that those characters would hide the gun particularly well. Maybe Eric
I,
von Steinheim, but the fact that they didn't find that when searching for the house is like, come on.
I'm pretty sure the cop has it on his finger, doesn't he?
Well, no, she has the gun at the end. It's like she shows him the gun. It's like, here, I'll do it. I'll kill myself. Like she has a gun in her house.
Oh, that's I see
That's
what
what I
you're
meant.
saying. They
That's what I
wouldn't
meant.
have found it when they were. I thought you meant at the end
No,
when they're
no, no.
searching. No,
Like
no.
when the
Okay, yeah, yeah.
doctors were searching for and taking out any weapons that she could do to hurt herself, they
Well,
left a
because
gun.
she said she went out and bought the gun. Isn't that the line?
But
I just
why
went
would
out today
they?
and bought it. Yeah, no, I
I
don't know if
can't
they did
remember
gun
that, but
checks back then. I think you
yeah,
could.
I guess not. But they checked for other weapons. Like they mentioned, they checked for other weapons, but they didn't find a gun. I found out that was a little bit weird. And when he pulled into the laneway to hide from the other guys, it's like he was only like a few feet in front of you. You should have noticed him pulling into the laneway. It wasn't like a quick getaway or it wasn't dark out or anything. But yeah, that was probably just an issue of technical limitations. That's it though. Just very minor nitpicks like that. What about you guys?
Oh,
I mean,
no,
I didn't have any major nitpicks like off the top of my head, but I did want to acknowledge an elephant, or I mean, angel we have in the room. Uh, we have Christian listening in, and I was wondering if he
I'm
wanted
sorry,
to say
Christian.
hi before we get into ratings.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Christian. I forgot to bring you up earlier. If you want to mute yourself and sub in with any thoughts you have on the discussion of the films, feel free to do so.
No, I'm all right. It's been a while since I've seen either of those films, but I mean, I do recall, uh, seeing them a number of years ago. They are quite good, but yeah, no, I'm just enjoying. There's not really a lot that I would have to add to the discussion of these films. I agree with, what's been said so far.
Nice. Thank you for
So,
listening in.
Cool.
Appreciate
You
it.
yeah.
enjoying yourself so
Yeah.
far?
Pardon?
I said you enjoying the podcast so far.
Oh, yes, I am. Yeah,
Thank,
absolutely.
Awesome.
thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you again for listening in. And what would you guys rate Sunset Boulevard out of 10?
I'm
Yeah.
gonna give it a 9.
Yeah. Daryl?
Like I can't explain. I feel like I haven't been that like informational this episode just because all I'm doing is just sucking the dick of this film. But
Oh,
like
no. That's
this
fine.
is a 10 for me, man. Like something happened
Wow.
in this rewatch. Like I don't know. Maybe I've just written enough films myself now that like so much of the humor hit and so much of the perspectives just were very clear to me, whereas they just may not have been back when I first came across it. And I've never really rewatched it too much, so this was a really fun revisiting, and like it's just a straight up 10 out of 10. Like this, I would put it on the masterpiece shelf. Like I really love this film.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was just reading how this is one of the very few films that got nominated for all the major Oscars, Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Editing, and all this. And this is one that definitely like deserved the ones that it did win. Um, and it just gets better with age, which very few films do. Like the more you look into it, the more fascinating it is, and very few films have that kind of staying power.
Mhm.
I'm gonna split the diff between both of your guys' score. I'm gonna give it the inverse of the sex number. I'm gonna give it a 9.6.
Yeah, saw
Ooh.
that coming.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Daryl. This is also one of my favorite films. It's just one film, one episode after another. We've just talked about a film from my top 25. It does get better with age. It is a very interesting and engaging movie on all fronts, and all the technical aspects are great. The set design is very convincing and tells a lot about the character. The music is great. The use of fades is very effective, and adds to the dreamlike quality. It's just a perfect example of how a meta narrative is done right. Doesn't take away from the movie. It doesn't just poke fun at how bad it is. It just adds to the experience and adds to the themes it's exploring so well that you just wouldn't want any other way, man. And I'm giving this, 9.6 out of 10. I'm with Devon on the score.
Nice.
So
Yeah, I,
fucking
I
good, man.
absolutely love meta
Fantastic.
narratives, and this is a golden standard example of how to really pull
Exactly.
off a meta narrative well, where it starts off in a realistic space, but then gets surreal, but in a way that really resonates and really hits and really makes a point. Where I feel like a lot of films that kind of go into that meta surreal territory almost use it as a crutch. Um, and this would be a self-criticism because I've always attempted kind of that space because I find it so fascinating. But who cares what's literally happening when I have this cool looking shot? And you can read,
Exactly.
you can interpret it different ways. Like there's a lot of films that kind of have that kind of crux where this film feels very thoughtful and the meta kind of stuff with Hollywood and all the business that's been happening there. It's all there, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Speaking
perfect
like
of
example of this
actresses'
kind
careers
of.
that didn't last very long, unfortunately, we've got The Last Seduction with our last film. I would like to introduce this one, if that's alright with you guys. Spoiler
Go
alert,
for it.
this one was a little more recent, 1994. It's a neo noir directed by John Dahl. It was supposedly originally made for straight to HBO before making its way to theaters, which apparently is the main reason why Linda Fiorentino, apologize if I butchered that pronunciation. Yeah, that was the reason she wasn't nominated for Best Actress that year at the Oscars. Because, man, her back must hurt from carrying this movie. Holy shit. She plays a demented woman named Bridget who ends up stealing a big pile of drug money from her husband, played by Bill Pullman, and runs off to hide in a small, remote, and slightly sexist town in the middle of nowhere. And that's just when she happens to meet the director of Battleship, Mike Swale, who's just thick enough and desperate enough to be persuaded into falling in love with Bridget and eventually making an attempt on her husband's life as well. You're probably thinking, wow, that just sounds like a generic noir thriller. That just sounds like Double Indemnity again. But what makes this one stand out, is that this time around it takes place from the femme fatale's perspective, solely from her perspective. In this case, Bridget's perspective. And despite its barrier of entry into the Oscars, and it didn't make that much money, it only had a $2.5 million budget. I think it made $5 million at most. It was still a huge hit with critics and kind of managed to get a bit of a cult following throughout the years, despite how hard it is to kind of find and you know watch on its own. Not a lot of Blu-rays out, not a lot of trivia out for this film. But personally, I can't say I hated the movie by any means, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit disappointed. But that being said, I'd like to hear what you guys think. Starting with the guests, what do you, Daryl and Jamar, think of this very sexy movie?
So
Very
sexy.
sexy.
Oh yeah, Linda, man.
That sums it up.
Are you going first, Daryl?
Yeah, I'll do a quick one first. I think probably the worst thing about this is that we have to compare it to two of Billy Wilder's greatest films.
Yeah.
A bit of
The
a
good
high
thing
bar.
about it is it's kind of like a hybrid of both. Like I feel like they used a big template for both these for both the films we've talked about are definitely in the DNA of this film, to say the least, let alone like borderline Double Indemnity remake at points from a different perspective. Interesting about the HBO. I did not know about that. That makes a whole lot of sense because I just kept saying to Jamara, like, man, there's a lot of sex scenes in here.
Yeah,
And
boy.
yeah, I think that drags the pace a little for me. But yeah, feel free, Jamara.
Um, I loved all the performances. I I really liked Bridget's character, Wendy. And I loved how she depicted all of the power dynamics and how like very I think it's like within the first 10 scenes of the movie she flips everything on its head, and it's really cool to follow her as opposed to following a hard-boiled detective trying to solve a murder or having been part of a murder. She's in the process of committing crimes, so you're just following her and her story and seeing where she goes with it all. I was very surprised later on to find that she was just as nutty as she turned out to be. But
Really?
Like the actress or her
uh,
character?
the character.
Yeah.
Really? I
But
didn't think they were beating around the bush for that because very early on she does. You can just tell like there's she's kind of grew up in a life of crime, and the whole appeal of the film, like even the marketing is just like, yeah, she's a bad girl. Yes, you're watching the bad guy in this movie, but
mm,
it's just interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I think her performance definitely carries this film, and she's incredible in every single scene that she's in.
Oh yeah.
You can tell that it's a made-for-TV movie, even though it's like HBO and there's a level of prestige with the 11.95 whatever price they were charging people to subscribe to their channel back then, which Max Headroom was not very happy about. That's a different story, but no, it's interesting to see kind of how the noir genre plays in this TV format, because this is almost like the second uh decade where noir became relevant again. Like there was that resurgence of neo-noir in um the 70s, which kind of bled into the 80s with neon noir, and that kind of giving birth to cyberpunk. And then this is like the 90s kind of rehashing it again. And
But more
now,
sexy.
oh yeah, now we have to inject extra sex and make the
Well,
reverse the roles around. Well, it does still play very much into those same kind of familiar tropes, but it does take it from a different kind of perspective.
I mean, it does feel like it is kind of reflecting on the Hayes Code in that way. Like, okay, what if we do one of the old school noirs, but we can actually show sex and we can actually show the gritty murder aspects of it and
Yeah.
whatnot. And like at the time, of course, you be pitched that and like, oh yeah, that's the perfect thing to put on. But like, I don't know, man. To me, it ruins the mystery and mystique of it all a
I
little
a
bit.
hundred
I do
percent
like
agree. I
I,
100% agree.
Yeah,
I
and
like that it
it's
was
very much in the
leveled,
light.
right? Oh, sorry.
It's very much in the lighting too. Like there isn't much contrast to the light, except for like maybe the
It's,
night scenes. But the lighting was just very kind of
it's so bland.
flat otherwise. Like it's very much a TV movie type of set. The way that they lit it doesn't feel like a noir. It feels like a kind of
Nothing
contemporary.
feels lived in.
Uh,
I mean,
yeah.
there's points, right? Like I kept saying to Jamar, like I could cut like 20 minutes off this film and it'd be fantastic because there's certain shots like I remember of all the nudity or whatever and I love the one where it kind of goes down her body but it's like focused on like the like creases of her or like the curves of it and it's not necessarily like a nudity shot but it really is kind of artsy in a way and they do a couple of good things like that but then like yeah
It,
it is very focused
yeah.
on showing the nudity.
Oh yeah. Lots of ass
Yeah.
in this movie. They should have called it the ass seduction. But that's my biggest issue of the movie is just how flat and boring it looks. And you could say, well, it was made straight to TV and it was made for low budget, but I don't know. Halloween and Tetsuo the Iron Man movies like that prove that even if you have dirt cheap, budgets, Tetsuo was literally made with a bunch of garbage. If you shoot it in an interesting way and cut it together in an interesting way and light it in an interesting way, you could still make a visually compelling experience. Despite your, budget limitations. But it feels like they just didn't even try in that regard, and that's
Well,
such a shame because that's what makes like these noir films work so well even now, is that style mixed with substance. But here it's just it felt like I was watching an episode of Seinfeld. Like everything just felt so flat and evenly lit and boringly shot
It's
from a
definitely
you know,
visual
not
now
that
perspective.
that now that you mention it, I could totally hear someone like cutting in the Seinfeld theme, like for like the ad breaks. Like
Yeah.
that'd be
Hey,
that'd be and actually I was going to comment on like the music that they one thing that kind of makes this film feel a little flat and what would have made it a lot more interesting is if they weren't using the same kind of jazzy motif all the time.
yeah,
over and
Like
over.
it's fine at
Mhm.
first, but then it just kind of undercuts or undersells the twisty plot. Like she gets away with murder essentially. Like spoilers for the ending. She kills her husband Bill Pullman by spraying a whole can of mace down his neck, and it's kind of a
brutal way to
badass
go.
way to go. And she gets away with it. But like the music is just this kind of like
Do 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 do.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
just
never
this kind
picks
of
up.
like
Yeah, it's so
upbeat kind of
unfunny.
meandering jazz piece where if David Lynch was doing this, it would have a completely different feel. And it's funny to
It'd be
see,
differently acted
by
too, though.
contrast, what he was doing at the time with like Lost Highway and Twin Peaks, like how he was kind of taking these noir tropes and really making them even darker, where this kind of makes it a little more lighthearted and TV friendly in a weird way, while also not abiding by the Hays Code and hey, we can get away with nudity now.
If
But that's kind of missing the
yeah,
point of what made noir so interesting and mystique. Not to say that doesn't add to it, but the way that they do it is just kind of flatly lit, where it doesn't have that same kind of mystique to it. Although, again, I think her character is what holds this film together.
I'd
It's like
agree with
she's
that.
the rug that ties the room together, but the room is kind of bare bones and there's no walls.
That's wow. That is a fantastic way of putting that. Actually, that's exactly how I feel. And about the music, what it felt like to me was, it felt like they paid the guy to do like two songs, but for whatever reason he couldn't stick around to do any more music, or they couldn't afford any more songs. So it's just like, you know
Hmm.
what? We gotta make the most out of this. We paid a lot of money for that music. We gotta just keep putting it in. They use it so often, like so many scenes. The suspense and tension is just ruined. And when it does it at the end of the movie with the climax, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like this is a
Yeah.
really dark and suspenseful scene, and that would have been great. That's what I was expecting. It's like, okay, they're using this light-hearted music throughout the whole movie, but this is it. Like they're gonna change the music, they're gonna change the tone, or use no music at all. But then they just use the same music again. It's like, I get that the director pitched this as a dark comedy, but this is the moment where we start taking it seriously. This is where the dark is leaned into it. I need a different song to play for this scene. And my biggest issue of the film, I think altogether, is it has that writing problem. You know, in like bad detective movies, they try to make the detective look smart by having them point out like an obvious piece of evidence at the crime scene that every other cop or every other investigator should have noticed. This is basically the same movie, but with a femme fatale. Like the movie is so insistent that like, oh, this girl is so clever, she's so smart and addictive, and she's outsmarting all of these men. But when you write every other character around her to be these complete oblivious morons, it's not really much of an accomplishment to outsmart them. I'm not really buying that she's a smart character if everyone else around her is just an idiot. It's like, well, she's just slightly less stupid. That's all you're really conveying with the character. And it's such a lazy, contrived way to kind of make a character seem smart and clever without actually earning it, and it kept driving me nuts.
Yeah, no, definitely same here, man. Especially when you have like Bill Pullman and even fucking Agent Shrouder made a little cameo in this.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
Dean Norris, man. I'm like I love the surprise little roles. Dean Norris in this. And like I was saying earlier, Bill Pullman. It's just funny to see going back and that they were all in this film, and then seeing where they split off. Where later Dean Norris for being in Breaking Bad. Bill Pullman shows up in Lost Highway, and then Linda ends up in Men in Black.
Right.
And it's just funny to see how their careers kind of split in those three different
Yeah.
directions
Mhm.
from this film.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like it originally started as some kind of like modern double indemnity script, because there is this really convoluted way of ending up at the same, like, well, let's pull double indemnity insurance fraud. And I was like, that's a little too on the nose for me.
A little on the. I think I screen capped that too. I'll see if I can dig it up, but I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's you're name dropping the wrong movie.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
fine if you just call this double indemnity and it is a dark new take on it, and
It,
like
Double
if
Indemnity Part 2.
Fucking Body Heat,
yeah,
which was a soft remake of Double Indemnity, never brings up Double Indemnity.
Oh no,
Like, come on.
Double Indemnity Part 2, double dipped.
Double. Speaking of double dicked, I'm sorry for ranting, but I just wanted to go on a quick rant about the end, and I would like to
Oh boy.
compare the ending of this movie to a scene in Gone Girl, because in both stories, they're trying to pin a sexual assault on the last guy standing in the scene. How do these two girls deal with it? So Rosamund Pike's character, spoiler for Gone Girl, approaches it in a much smarter way. She, creates this story for like camera footage around the house that she dips like her panties in wine and makes it look like she's got blood in her cooch, so to speak, and as soon as he comes home, like she has sex with him. But the thing is, she kills him. She kills him, and while being fucked, so he could be like, oh well, he sexually assaulted me. But I slit his throat. I had to defend myself. There's no witness to say otherwise. The Linda's master plan for that in the last Seduction is to give him Vietnam flashbacks of his traumatic past, and while she's having sex with him, as you do, she calls the police right next to him and mentions
he
what's
doesn't notice.
happening, and he doesn't notice. I'm like, he could harm you. He could run away. He could stop what he's doing and leave. Like, you have to do something with him. Like, finish. I understand finishing because apparently he's hung like a horse, but finish, knock him out, tie him up, kill him, something, anything. But if you let him leave, like, he can testify against you. Like, that's evidence against you. And again, like, that was your master plan. That was everything the film was building up to. Just calling the cops right next to him, pulling a really dumb move. Like, this is the clever, smart character that's been building up a scheme throughout the entire movie. Like, it pissed me off. Again, I know I'm not supposed to take it super seriously, but some convincing behavior would be nice.
I
And
felt
he's
bad. I almost
also
laughed, with how like conveniently that all worked out.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
know, and maybe that was the
Yeah.
point, but it just felt unsatisfying to me. I don't know. They could
you
have
have
made
not
it funny while making it more satisfying, There are ways you can pull that off. Edgar Wright does it all the time in his films. for example.
Oh yeah.
But there are things I do appreciate about it. Like you said, like all the performances are solid. Linda Fiorentino is just fantastic. Like she's Shame made me question my sexuality. This movie made me straight again. Let's just put it that way. I'm sorry to have to say that. But, genuinely fantastic performance. Should have been nominated for an Oscar. There are funny scenes in it. Like, for a while, the tone was kind of working for me when he's like, I'm hung like a horse, and she just very casually jerks him off in the bar. He's like, what the fuck? Wait, what are you doing?
Well, she was just trying to confirm his claim, looking for some horse-like attributes.
Yeah, I know. Like, that was
Which I
really
thought,
funny.
which I thought was a funny way to word it.
Yeah, like
And
that was funny, and there was some clever like use of set design. At least, like it's very blandly shot and very blandly presented overall. But I don't know, like the idea of her apartment being empty outside of like the bare essentials, like a lamp and a bed, is like it's kind of like femme fatale meta commentary. I get it, and it has like a great beginning. I think the beginning of the film is really good and really does like suck you into this like darkly comedic and bizarre world. Bill Pullman begging for mercy is just really funny, and now the guards are like, okay, we're just gonna give you the money, we're not really gonna shoot you or anything, but I don't know, all of that's just buried under a bland pile of stupidity. Like I just really want to like this film more than I did, but I
well,
couldn't get with it.
I'm wondering what her character motivation was in the end. Does she just like besting people,
She
and
just
that's
likes
her way of having fun?
well, she wants
Like,
money and
That's it.
independence. Is my guess.
Like, is there more to that I was missing? I'm just curious.
Well, I don't know. I think she just wanted independence. Like, yeah, I'm a bad bitch. I don't need no man or anything along those lines. I don't know. Yeah, that wasn't really properly
I
conveyed,
think it's
was
just
it?
because he hit her. Like, and they keep
Well,
leading into that like idea, and I don't know. Like, it
at
made me
first
start
it
believing it.
was. At first it was because he slapped her, and I really liked that aspect that like, oh, you're gonna steal all this money and expect that like we stick together, but if you treat me like that, then
Yeah, fuck
fine,
you.
I'll take
Yeah.
the money and be on my own. And I thought that was great motivation for the first half of the movie. And then the whole double indemnity side plot, like it just was so unnecessary to me that they needed to make her that wild and that greed hungry. Like I guess that is part of her character, but she had so much money. She killed the PI. Like what else did she need at that point?
Yeah.
She's almost like cartoonishly maniacal in this, where it's like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it
it's
kind of
like
ruins the fun of a
she's
character like that.
this is the
it
most twirled,
does.
non-existent mustache I've seen on a woman.
Yeah,
You know?
and part of me does kind of like that. Where I don't know if you've seen this awful movie called I Care a Lot with Rosamund Pike, but basically it's like it shows like a similar character, but it's like, oh, but she had a rough childhood, she had a hard life, and this really dumb attempts to get you to sympathize with the character. But I can at least appreciate where it's like they never go that route with her.
Mhm.
Like they kind of leave it up to the audience to take away from the character. But it's like you said, I think they went a little too far to the point where I was just kind of confused by her motivations at the end. It's
Well,
like
they're
I don't
trying
need
to
like
build
any
her up
sob
so hard.
stories or any. Yeah, they build her up so hard, and it's such like an unsatisfying climax. So it's like
No,
more.
but that's why, right? Because they're building this one layer, which is the whole big subplot, which is like, oh, a smart femme fatale would create this big plot.
Mhm.
But then the twist I quite enjoyed was when the two guys just have a moment of holy shit, we're getting fucked over here.
Yeah.
And that completely changes the dynamic. Then what they do is try and kind of raise her to a level beyond any level we've had yet, which is just like straight murder, not just convincing others, like straight murder and then the frame rape. And like that's where things start to get weird, because the only way she's still a smart character is if you're telling me that by going down and talking to Trish, she was in enough belief that by just bringing up the name, she would be able to somehow twist that into him raping her when he hasn't shown any qualities like that yet. So
Yeah.
like that's the moment where things start not fitting, because you're trying to make a character too smart so that unless it's her acting completely in the spur of the moment, which could make sense, but then I don't know,
It's a
that
big risk to take.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it, right?
I
Like,
don't
what
buy that she
happens if
would do
this
that. Like, why is
fails?
she
Like, I
even
think there's
there?
too many what ifs, and
Yeah,
it doesn't make you smart. It just makes you, I don't know, like reactionary, which
Extremely
doesn't.
lucky.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like, she's just extremely lucky in this movie when she's in the car with the hitman, and she's like, "Oh, I hear, black guys have these big dicks, and I always want to see your dick," and it somehow works. It's like, what?
and
Like,
that's
Yeah.
what is
based
this supposed to be
completely off him wanting to
funny?
take his dick out.
Yeah, and it's kind
Like,
of funny, I guess, but at that point, I just lost my patience. It's like I just need one smart character, just one smart character,
see,
one
I'll give her
character to
that.
compete with.
I feel like if it wasn't the dick again, I might have been more down because
Yeah,
if it were some more like creative way to get him to take off his
yeah,
seatbelt,
exactly.
maybe I would have been down because I like that whole moment that, I'll crash my own car to get this done. Like, I dig that, but the dick thing soured the moment for me. This movie was
I'm
just so sexually geared.
It also
And
didn't
I'm
know
usually
like
not
what it
yeah.
down.
wanted to be. Like he said, it's a dark comedy, but I don't know. Like it feels
I
like
never
it's
get this.
just taking
You've mentioned that
its.
a couple times. I never get
Some
comedy from
scenes
this
are like
movie,
silly
really.
enough that it could be interpreted that way, but there are other scenes that are so serious, and the twist is kind of
Yeah.
horrifying. That it's like, okay, like either pick a more consistent tone or pick better times to balance between the tones, and they couldn't really pick either for this movie. And yeah,
Mm.
sorry, Steven, if you're listening to this, your waifu Linda couldn't save the movie.
Or just make softcore porn if that's your goal. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know how else
I,
to put it.
it
Like,
exactly.
It's like most of the way there already. I mean,
yeah.
just
but
just finish up. Come on.
I just had to share the screenshot talking about like that whole car scene. Guy getting his dick out. He says the 40 in my fuck ain't gonna work either. I like that line.
Yeah,
Which again, he was smarter than her in those moments,
yeah,
and then is like, you
exactly.
know what? I think I will.
Yeah,
It's like,
I was
what?
so excited because I was
No.
like, wow, a clever character. She actually has stone smart. Like, I'm excited to see how it plays out. And it's like, oh, it's just gonna whip his dick out because all men are really stupid and all men are really horny and
Well,
assholes. And come
we
on.
only have enough blood for one head or the other, and once it trickles down, all thoughts go. That's the joke everyone makes, right? So
I guess
that's
so. But
that's the movie logic. We only have enough blood for one or the other. So
yeah, but that's a shit post. That's not something I want in my movie. But yeah, I don't really have much else to add for this one. Just kind of underwhelming. And yeah, the performances are great, and there's some entertaining bits in it, and it starts well, but it just kind of falls apart at the seams. And the more it went along, the more it just tested my patience. I was gonna give it a 6 out of 10, but I'm gonna go lower. 5.5 out of 10. I couldn't get with this movie, man. Linda, you tried your best, but you couldn't save it. You did definitely deserve that Oscar, though. You really should have been nominated.
I don't know about an Oscar nom for it,
No,
but yeah.
well,
she should have won.
I think she definitely deserves more notoriety for it. Although I was looking up her Wikipedia a little while ago, just reading up on her career. Like, what else has she been in? Because I know her from Men in Black and a couple other things, but um, she didn't have. Well, she did some like TV movies after this, but apparently she was caught up in some like scandal with a boyfriend that was formerly in the FBI, and there was some kind of legal trouble there. She might be in jail. It's very vague about how it's written, but it's almost like her real life person parallels her character,
Oh
which I
yeah.
find interesting.
That is
But
interesting.
yeah, I just posted some screenshots that I found really funny,
Nice.
out of context.
Yeah. So we got like the screenshot of, hey, it's me, designated fuckboy, on the voicemail, and the double indemnity, very subtle, title card that shows up later in the movie, and yeah, I don't know. What would you guys rate this out of 10?
I think you know what my rating is, Ian.
Yeah, 6.9.
Yeah.
You got it. Daryl, Jamar, what about you guys?
Cut out there.
Great thoughts.
Yeah, cut out.
Daryl, I think you cut out. If you can hear me.
Oh, sorry, that would make sense. Yeah, no, I'm going 6.9 too.
Nice. Jamar?
I'm gonna go 6.5.
Good. Don't suffer into the juvenile humor. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's my joke anyway.
Well,
No,
thank you
it's all good.
guys so much for joining in tonight. Special thanks. Was it Chris who's listening in? I apologize. I'm terrible with names.
Christian.
Christian, thank you so much for listening in. Daryl and Jamar, you were fantastic guests. I'm sorry if I ranted a little bit. I'm very passionate about this genre, but thank you so much for tagging along. Your insights were great. As usual, Daryl and Jamar, you were a fantastic guest.
Thank you so much.
No, thank
Pleasure
you.
to be here.
Oh, pleasure to have you. Devon, what crazy episode recommendation concoction do you have for us next week?
Oh God. So, assuming all things go to plan, this time, we have Matt Damon. Sorry, not Matt Damon. Fresh Stink or Nathan Shapiro, coming up on our podcast next week to do
Yes.
a clown episode because he is actually a someone that went to clown school, and this goes way back to an episode we did on the Cold War of all things, and we were talking about the death of Stalin, and he was a new person on our server back then, and he gave us some very surprising insights to how the death of Stalin can be read as a movie about clowning, and that just fascinated me. So I wanted to look at that genre more seriously, even though I hate clowns. But this is me
That makes it better.
tackling that. No, this is me tackling that phobia head on, just to see what the fascination is or what the um, philosophy is behind it. That's the whole idea kind of behind this. But the films that we're looking at to examine the art of clowning under a more serious lens are Joker, The King of Comedy, and Wrinkles the Clown, which is a
Oh,
documentary.
I forgot we were talking about the King of Comedy. Oh man,
Yeah.
Wrinkles
Yes.
the Clown.
Originally, I pitched it, and I pitched it almost as a joke, like more than a year ago, saying next year for episode 69, which didn't end up happening for that, but I'm happy with what episode 69 ended up being anyway. Originally, I wanted to do The Day the Clown Cried, and Jackass as well as Joker, but you obviously can't watch The Day the Clown Cried, but you can talk about why you can't watch it. It's about a clown that tries to cheer up kids during the Holocaust, which was never released by the filmmaker because he thought this is the worst thing I've ever made, and I don't want any mortal eyes to ever
No
see it
kidding.
while I'm alive.
Definitely not that bad, but yeah.
Yeah.
Wrinkles
Well,
the Clown.
anyway,
Yeah.
should be an interesting discussion. Hopefully,
Can't
we
wait,
hear
man.
back from Mr. Stink by then, and we'll finally get this clown episode ticked off the list.
Nice. I can't wait. Thank you guys so much for listening in again, and is it Thursday yet? Have a great night, guys. See you later.